All right, well, welcome to the credit presentation from the Financial Education Program. My name is Kristen Short. I'm a PhD student in financial planning, and this is my second year. So really the whole purpose of this financial education program is to provide resources to graduate students around the topic of personal finance. So the research shows that financial stress is a big stressor for graduate students. And being a graduate student myself, I can certainly resonate with that. And so really the whole hope for this program is that we can just provide financial education to graduate students in an effort to reduce stress around finances. So today we're going to be talking about credit, and I hope that you'll be able to walk away with something new and helpful that you didn't know before about credit. So to start out, this is kind of the age-old debate when it comes to credit. Is credit good or bad? A lot of us have grown up with different backgrounds, being taught different things about credit and whether it's a good tool or whether it's dangerous and we should avoid it. So I just want to acknowledge that we all come into this conversation with some context and background about our perception about credit. So because of that, I want to make clear to you what the context and kind of preconceived notions I have about credit, and that way you kind of know what angle I'm coming from as I approach this topic of credit. So for me, I see credit as ranging on a spectrum from problematic to strategic. So I think there are certainly instances in which credit and debt can become problematic and can be really a challenge financially for families. And at the same time, I don't think we can really get away with avoiding credit entirely in our society. And so I think there's a way to use credit that's very strategic and that can actually help your financial situation tremendously, and that you shouldn't entirely shy away from credit. So what are some examples of some things that might fall on this spectrum? Well, on the problematic side, we have things like payday loans, title loans, certain retail loans, and uncontrolled credit card debt. So each of these things, while maybe occasionally could be used well, most often can become pretty problematic when it comes to debt. So a lot of these are very high interest related debts and are very difficult to pay back for those who take them out. On the other side of the spectrum, we have things like student loans or a home mortgage or credit cards when used wisely. So again, these types of debts are not necessarily always strategic. They could become problematic if not used well. But for the most part, these things tend to be the type of credit that can actually help you financially in the future. So for example, student loans, you take out some student loans so that you can go to graduate school. By going to graduate school, you're able to increase your earning potential. Research shows it could be anywhere from $10,000 more than you were earning prior to grad school up to $50,000 or $60,000 more than what you were earning before grad school. Or in some instances with professional programs, that gap could be even bigger. So student loans really could be used strategically to increase your earning potential, which makes them a pretty strategic form of credit. Home mortgage is very similar. You're able to purchase a home and get equity in that home so that when it comes time to sell it, you can actually have a gain on your funds that you don't necessarily get when you're renting a property. And then credit cards can be useful just for building your credit score and establishing that credit history so that when those times come when you need to apply for a loan, you have that good score. So again, credit is not black and white, good and bad. It kind of exists on this spectrum. And I challenge each one of you to think about, are the debts that I have currently problematic or strategic? And what changes could I make in order to make those debts more strategic? All right. So let's cover some foundational, just kind of credit and debt 101 definitions here. So Credit is the ability to obtain goods or services for a promise to pay at some later date. Debt is something, typically money, that's owed or due to someone else. Okay, so those definitions may not, click right away, the distinguishing factor between the two of them. So let's look at a little example here. So let's say you have credit available to you of $10,000. You got approved, you can borrow $10,000 in order to buy something now, and then promise to pay back at a later point in time. But let's say you don't actually need the full $10,000. So let's say you only use $7,000 of those $10,000. All right. Well, whenever you borrow money, there's always a cost associated to borrowing that money. The fee or the cost of borrowing that money, let's say, is 10%, so $700. You have to pay a $700 fee to borrow the $7,000. And so now you have a total balance of $7,700 that you're going to have to pay back to the person you borrowed the money from. The initial amount that you were able to take out is the credit. The final amount that you owe to the lender is your debt. The initial $7,000 you took out is the principal, and the fee that accumulates while you have that debt outstanding is the interest. All right, so that kind of differentiates some of those terms, but just know that in our society, a lot of people use the terms debt and credit pretty interchangeably, and I may even use them fairly interchangeably throughout the presentation, but just know that definitionally speaking, credit is what you have access to, and debt is what you've actually used and need to pay back. All right, so let's cover some types of credit and debt. So in general, there's two types of credit: revolving credit and installment credit. Typically, we refer to revolving credit as just credit, and we typically refer to installment credit as just a loan. Okay, so credit or revolving credit is credit access up to a limit as often as you want, repaid on a monthly basis, at least a minimum payment. Okay, so examples of this would be like credit cards, so a bank credit card or a retail credit card or a home equity line of credit. So with a credit card, you have a total amount that you're allowed to use each month. You can use as much of that as you want, and then you just pay it off what you've used each month, and it continually refreshes as you pay it back. So you can pay it back, take out more, pay it back, take out more. It's revolving. With an installment credit or a loan, you borrow money for a set period of time and then repay that lump sum of money in monthly installments. Okay, so there's only one dispersal of funds to you in one lump sum amount, and then you slowly pay that back over time with monthly installments. So examples of this would be getting a mortgage for your home, taking out a student loan, taking out a car loan to purchase cars. So in each of these instances, you're going to get the full amount of the money up front, and then you're going to make monthly installment payments back to the lender. So once you get that chunk of money for the car loan and you start paying it off, you can't then, tap back into what you've paid off to take out more. It's not revolving in any way. There's just one installment, and then you pay off that installment in monthly installments. Okay, so then once you have a debt, there's two ways you can characterize that debt. It can be considered either secured debt or unsecured debt. A secured debt is guaranteed by collateral, which means if you don't make payments back on it, or you miss a payment or multiple payments, you're at risk of losing some form of property that's serving as collateral against that debt. So examples of this would be like a home mortgage or a car loan or a home equity line of credit. If you don't make payments back on your home mortgage, then the lender can, in the end, take your home from you. If you don't make payments on your car loan, in the end, the lender can take your car from you, right? So those debts are secured against property that the lender can seize from you if you don't pay back on the debt. Unsecured debt is debt that's not guaranteed by collateral, all right? So if you don't make payments back, there's nothing, the lender can come take from you. They can't hack into your bank account, or they can't come take your car or take your house. the worst that can happen is your credit score will go down from not making payments. The debt might go to collections. You'll get a lot of phone calls, but ultimately there's no property that they can take. So some examples of this would be like credit cards, or another example would be even medical debt are both unsecured. And then student loans are technically unsecured debt. So if you don't make payments back on your private student loans, then there's nothing the private lender can do, to take property from you. The one caveat to this is if you have federal student loans. If you have federal student loans, they're technically unsecured, but just know that the federal government has certain collection powers if you don't make payments on those loans. So they can garnish your wages, they can take your tax returns. So they do have certain powers to get the funds if you aren't making payments. So just be cautious with that. All right, so to put those together, each of your debts will be either a revolving debt or an installment debt, and will be either a secured debt or an unsecured debt. All right, so let's kind of walk through where each of these types of credit and debt would fall into this chart. So first, a home mortgage. Which box would a home mortgage fall into? A secured installment, right? So when you take out a home mortgage, you get one lump sum, and then you make back monthly installment payments. And if you don't make payments, secured against your house, so they can take your house, right? So it's a secured installment. What about credit cards? Unsecured revolving. So you have a credit limit, you can borrow up to that credit limit as much as you want on a revolving basis, as long as you're making payments back. And if you fail to make payments, it's unsecured, they can't take property against you. What about a car loan? Secured installment, just like a home mortgage, right? What about student loans? Unsecured installment, right? You get one lump sum when you take out your student loans, make payments in monthly installments, but technically they're unsecured. There's no property serving as collateral against the loans. And then finally, a home equity line of credit. All right, if it's not obvious, it's a secured revolving. So basically, if you're not familiar with a home equity line of credit, basically what it is when you own a home or you have a mortgage on a home, you have a certain amount of equity or ownership in that home. So let's say the home is worth $200,000 and you have an outstanding mortgage of $100,000. Your ownership or your equity in the house would be the other $100,000, right? You own $100,000 of the home and you owe $100,000 on the home. So what you can do with a home equity line of credit is you can basically tap into some of the ownership in your home and have access to funds from the bank. You can borrow funds from the bank against the equity in your house. So of that $100,000 that you own in the house, you can say, hey, I want to open a home equity line of credit of $10,000, and the bank will give you a credit limit of $10,000, and you can spend whatever of that $10,000 you want each month, and pay it off each month just like you would a credit card. And then on a revolving basis, you have access to those funds up to $10,000. But if you don't make payments, then it's secured against your house. So if you don't make payments, then you would be at risk of losing your house. So that's why it's a secured revolving debt. How do we go about getting access to credit? Well, there's something called credit worthiness, and it's made up of what we call the 5 C's. So we're going to go over what these 5 C's are. And basically, these 5 C's are a way for lenders to evaluate how likely you are to repay or not repay your loan. So it's basically a question of, are you going to be a good borrower? All right, so you kind of have to check each of these 5 boxes, and some types of credit are easier to get without checking as many of the boxes, and other types of credit you have to check, almost all the boxes in order to get approved. So the first C is character, and character is basically in reference to your credit score. So a lender is going to look at your credit score, and that score is going to give them an objective measure of how good of a borrower you are. And we're going to talk about credit scores in a couple slides here. The second thing is capacity. So capacity refers to your income or your cash flow. In certain types of lending and borrowing, the lender is going to look at what your income is before they extend credit to you, because they want to have the assurance that you have the funds coming in each month to make payments on that debt. So recently I had a question from somebody that said, hey, I have a credit score of about 800 and I recently applied to get a credit card and I was denied. How is this possible? Well, I can't be certain why they got denied, but my guess would be that they failed to check this second C. Maybe they were a grad student, maybe they didn't have an assistantship, maybe they had no income coming in, or even if they had an assistantship, maybe it was a very small income. And so wherever they applied for the credit card, when that company asked for their income, it could be that the income that this person reported was not sufficient to check the capacity box. All right, so even though they had a really strong credit score, they didn't have proof of income or funds coming in each month that would let the lender know, hey, I have the resources to pay back any debt I take from you. So the third C is capital. This is what we often refer to as a down payment. So of course, capital or down payment is not going to be relevant in instances like getting a credit card, because you don't have to make a down payment when you get a credit card. But if you're taking out a loan for a car, or if you're trying to take out a home mortgage, then the down payment makes a big difference as to whether or not you're going to get the loan, or even the interest rate that you're going to get on that loan. So the bigger the down payment, the more likely it is that you'll be approved for the loan and the better rate you'll get. 4 is collateral. So this is basically whether or not the credit that you're taking is going to be secured against some sort of collateral. And then 5 stands for conditions. And this is basically the intended use of a loan. So for example, if you're trying to open up a home equity line of credit and you tell the lender that the reason why you want to open this line of credit is because you just lost your job and you want to have access to funds to pay your monthly bills and food and all that kind of stuff, that probably is not going to get approved, right? Because the intended use is not something that's going to, increase the value of your home or help you get more income. Instead, that's basically telling the lender, I'm gonna borrow this money to cover my monthly expenses that I can't afford, which means I probably can't even afford to pay back that loan. But if you're opening a home equity line of credit and you tell the lender, I'm using this credit to put a new roof on my home that's going to impact and increase the value of my home by the same amount or more than the loan I'm taking out, then that would be considered a good intended use of the funds, and you would be more likely to get approved for that loan. Right? So each of these 5 C's go into your credit worthiness when you're applying for credit. And some lenders will place higher emphasis on 1 or 2 of these over the other, but these are all the factors that you should be thinking about when it comes to applying for a loan and anticipating whether or not you may be approved for that loan. One thing you'll notice is that none of these C's make reference to the amount of debt you have. So a lot of graduate students are scared of what the future might hold because they have student loans and they think, I'll never be able to be approved for a mortgage or for a car loan because I have so much student loan debt. But really, none of these 5 C's say anything about debt. So really, the amount of debt that you have doesn't impact your credit worthiness. However, I will say that when applying for certain types of loans, like a home mortgage, there is an additional factor that the lender is going to consider, which is your debt to income ratio. Okay, so this may kind of fall under the category of capacity, but the debt to income ratio is basically a ratio of the total amount of monthly funds that have to go towards paying off monthly minimum payments on your debts versus the amount of income that you have coming in. So let's say you have a minimum payment on your credit cards of $50 a month, and let's say you have a minimum payment on your student loans of $150 a month. So every month you have $200 worth of required debt payments. Well, if your income each month is $1,000 and your required debt payments that month are $200, you have a debt to income ratio of 20%, 200 divided by 1,000. All right, so when it comes to applying for home mortgages, your debt to income ratio needs to be below 43%, right? So if your monthly payments towards debts exceeds 43% of what you're bringing in each month, then you will not be approved for a mortgage. But just remember and keep in mind that it's not a ratio of the total amount of debt you have. It's just a ratio of the minimum payment you have to make each month compared to your income each month. All right, so before we get into credit scores, I just want to go over a little bit how credit cards work, because I know that several of you may have never had a credit card before. And even those of you who do have a credit card, there's certain terms that I'm going to make reference to when we're talking about credit scores, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what I'm making reference to. All right, so here's how credit cards work. You get a credit card, and that credit card has a credit limit, okay? Whether it's $500, $5,000, $10,000, there's a limit on the amount you can take out. And each month you can spend whatever you need up to the limit. After that billing period or that month, you're going to receive a statement from the bank that says how much you spent during that month and when you have to pay back that amount by. And on that statement, they're going to give you two amounts that you could pay back. One of them is going to be the minimum amount, which is the minimum amount you have to pay to stay in good standing. And then the second number is going to be the full amount. So the full amount that you spent on the card during that month, right? And then you are responsible for paying either the minimum amount or the statement balance by the due date. And that due date is typically 3 weeks later. Just to illustrate, it might look something like this. Let's say that your billing period is from May 1st to June 1st. And keep in mind, not everybody's billing periods are from the 1st of the month to the 1st of the month or the 31st to the 31st. Like your billing period might be from the 13th of one month to the 13th of the next month. So it could be any day of the month, but it will always happen in 1 month increments. So it will be the same date every month. So in this example, we've got a billing period from May 1st to June 1st. During that time, you can spend up to the limit on the card, however much you want up to the limit. On June 1st, the bank's going to send you a statement that says how much you spent during that month. And they're going to say, this is what you have to pay us by the balance due date, which is the 26th. And on that due date, you can either pay us the minimum amount or the statement balance, okay? So the minimum amount that we determine or the amount that showed up on the statement on June 1st. And that payment you have to make by the 26th. But keep in mind that even though you have this grace period of a few weeks after the statement date to make your payment for that billing period, as soon as your statement comes out on June 1st, your next billing period starts. Okay, so any remaining money that's available in your credit limit, you can start spending that money in June because the next statement period has already started from June 1st to July 1st. All right, so let's say that from May 1st to June 1st, you spent $1,000 on your card. On the statement date, the bank would tell you, okay, you have to make either a minimum payment, $15, or you have to pay off the full $1,000 by June 26th. But then let's say from June 1st to June 26th, you keep using the card and you charge another $700 on it. By the time you get to the due date, the total balance on your credit card is going to be $1,700, right? The $1,000 from the first billing period plus the $7,000 that you spent since then. So it can get kind of confusing when it comes to June 26th to figure out what you actually need to pay. All right, so you'll see this minimum payment amount, you'll see what the total credit limit is, you'll see what the outstanding balance is, you'll see what's available left on the card to spend, and then you'll see your last statement balance. This $15 is the minimum amount that you have to pay in order to be considered on time, making a payment on time. The drawback to making that minimum payment is that you're going to get charged interest on everything and on anything that you didn't pay off on the card. Okay, so that's the drawback of minimum payments. This $1,000, the last statement balance, that's the amount you have to pay to be considered on time with no interest. So if you don't want to accumulate any interest on what you spend on your credit card, you always need to pay at least the last statement balance by the time the due date comes, or the 26th in this example. So what is this outstanding balance right here? Basically, if you pay the full $1,700 on June 26th, you're basically paying ahead by $700, right? So those $700 aren't going to show up on a statement until July 1st because you spent them since June 1st. You spent them in the second billing period. So technically, you are not responsible for paying that $700 yet, but you can if you want to. You'll just be ahead by $700. Let's talk about credit scores. What is a credit score? So similar to credit worthiness, credit score is just a number that depicts the probability a person will repay their debts. Who looks at credit scores? Well, you might think it's just people that you're applying for credit from, but actually in today's day and age, we have our credit scores checked a lot more frequently than that. Just some examples: potential lenders, of course, potential landlords. If you're applying for an apartment, there's a good chance that that landlord is going to check your credit score and have a required minimum credit score in order to rent that property. Potential employers look at your credit score. So if you're applying to a job that has any relation to money at all, whether you have a budget or you oversee someone who has a budget, any relation to money, or even if you don't handle money, there's still a chance that your employer will check your credit score. Now, they'll never check your credit score without your permission, so you'll always be informed about when they're doing so. But just know that when you're on the job market, you're looking for jobs, there's a good chance that your employers are going to look at your credit score. So that kind of goes back to that initial question: is credit good or bad? Credit you can use it, and you need to use it really pretty strategically to make sure that you're in a good position for these instances when people check your credit score, and having a roof over your head or having a job are contingent on how good your credit score is. All right, so there's some motivation and some reason to pay attention to this and to work hard at getting your credit score to a good range. So how is a credit score calculated? There are several companies out there who have their own algorithm and formula for how a credit score is calculated. The most popular or common credit score company is FICO. Okay, so we're going to talk about how FICO creates their scores, because most people, when they check your credit, they're going to look at your FICO score. First aspect of your credit score is your payment history, and 35% of your score is attributed to this payment history. So it's the largest part of your score. And what payment history means is simply, have you made on-time payments? If you've made on-time payments on every credit card, student loan, auto loan, mortgage that you've ever had, then you'll have a perfect score in the payment history portion of your credit score. What's one way you can make sure that you have a perfect score in the payment history section? You can set up auto pay. If you have auto pay set up on all of your accounts, then you will never miss a payment and you will have perfect credit payment history, right? And that doesn't have to be the last statement balance. That could be just the minimum payment. So as long as you make either the minimum payment or the full last statement balance, you will be in good standing for your payment history. 30% is something called amounts owed or the utilization rate. Basically, what the utilization rate is it's a proportion of how much of your credit you spend each month in comparison to how much you have access to. And you want this ratio to be less than 30% at the very most. And in the best case scenario, you want this ratio to be under 10 to 15%. All right, so here's a little example. So let's say you had a credit card with a limit of $1,000. Okay, so we're looking up here at the top of the slide. And let's say every month you spent $500 of that $1,000. Your utilization ratio or utilization rate would be 50%. Now, let's say you had 2 credit cards. And the second credit card also had a limit of $1,000. And let's say you didn't spend anything on that credit card from month to month. Your credit utilization ratio is the combined total of everything you've spent across all of your cards divided by all the credit limits you have available to you across all your cards. All right, so the total here would be $500 spent divided by $2,000 credit limit access. Your credit utilization rate would be 25%. Okay, so the way you can figure out what your utilization rate is you can take the total amount you spent across all of your credit cards, whether they're at different banks or one's a retail card or whatever it may be, all of your revolving credit. Take everything that you spent that month, divide it by everything that you have access to, the total limits across all those cards, and then that's how you can figure out your utilization rate. So, question. When does the credit bureau get access to the amount that you spend each month? Like how do they determine what number goes on the top of that fraction? Whatever is reported on your statement. Okay, so remember we went over how credit cards worked. We said the first billing period was from May 1st to June 1st. June 1st was the statement date. And then that statement was due payment-wise by June 26th. Okay, so whatever number shows up on the June 1st statement, that number is what gets reported to the credit bureaus and what goes into the calculation of your utilization rate. Let's say you always pay off your balance in full. If you wait for your statement to come out and say you spent $500 of your $1,000 this month, and then by June 26th or whenever the payment is, you pay off the full $500, your utilization ratio is going to be 50%, so 500 divided by 1,000, because your statement said you spent $500. But if you anticipate the date of your statement and pay off what you've spent a day before your statement comes out, so let's say your billing period is from May 1st to June 1st, and you've spent $500, if you go in on May 31st and you pay off the $500, then when your statement comes out on June 1st, it'll say you spent $0 during that billing period. All right, so then that $0 will be reported to the credit bureaus and your utilization ratio will be 0%. Okay, so this is a way that you can actually have a big impact on your credit score, especially if you know you're going to be applying for a loan of some sort in the coming days. You can do this to kind of temporarily boost your credit score by making sure to pay off all of your credit cards before their statements come out so that your utilization ratio is really low. So then 15% is the length of history, which is basically how long have you had credit open. And this 15% right here is, case in point, the argument for going ahead and getting a credit card if you don't already have one, okay? It takes time to build up your length of history, and that goes into your credit score. So if you don't have a credit card yet and you think you're gonna wanna get a home mortgage in the next 5 years, you've gotta open at least one credit card and start building up that credit history. 10% of your score comes from types of credit. So they want to see that you've been able to handle a mixture of different types of credit. So somebody who has a credit card versus somebody who has a credit card and a student loan, the person with just the credit card is going to have a lower credit score than the person who has a credit card and a student loan, all else equal. right? So the person who has more variety in the types of credit they have is going to have a higher score. And then 10% is called new credit. So new credit is basically anytime you apply for new credit, you get a little bit of a negative ding to your score. That negative impact to your score is going to last for about a year after applying for that credit. Now, in instances where you need to shop around for credit to try to get the best interest rate, like if you're trying to finance a car or get a mortgage, as long as you do all of your shopping around and all of your credit checks to get that loan within a short window of time, like 2 weeks for a car loan and within a month for a mortgage, then it will only hurt your credit score as if you have only one request for new credit, even though you've shopped around at different places. Okay, so just condense that searching period to a small window of time and it will only impact your score negatively as if it were one time. So what is a good credit score? Here's a full range of what your credit scores could be, ranging from very bad to excellent. And I would say, as long as you're to the right side, good, very good, or excellent, you're in good shape. You're going to get access to most of the loans and credit that you need access to. And once you get into those green boxes, the very good and excellent, you're going to get the best interest rates. Okay, so once you have like a 760 or 780 credit score, passing that 800 threshold or even getting up to that perfect score, like it's not actually going to help your interest rates that much. And you're probably going to get the same rates as the people who have the 760 score. Okay, so just aim to be in those green boxes if you can. Now, if you don't have a credit history, your credit score is 0. Okay, like you don't even show up on this spectrum. If you've never had a student loan, if you've never had a credit card, again, it's super important. Go ahead and open one. You don't have to use it a ton, but go ahead and start building that record because your credit score is 0 currently. And when you first get credit, don't worry, you're not going to start at 300. You'll start somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, and then you'll go up or down depending on how well you use that card. So how can you find out your credit score? Basically, you can go to the bank or credit card company where you have a checking account or credit account, and they should be able to give you a FICO score for free. If not, then you can go to a place called creditkarma.com and look up your credit score there. Just be careful because the site has a lot of ads for credit cards and financing, and not all of those are actually good deals, and I definitely do not endorse any of those, but it is a good resource for finding your credit score if you can't find it elsewhere. How do others see your credit? Basically what happens is credit bureaus collect credit information from all of your lenders and they put it on this big report. So the credit bureaus are Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and they take all this information, compile it together. And it's basically everything that's needed to calculate your credit score. So you can think about your credit report as like your transcript. So it has all the information, all the details there. And then your credit score is like your GPA. Okay, so credit report is like a transcript. Credit score is like the GPA. It's just the final number that's a result of the information on the credit report. So it'll have stuff like your identifying information, your credit history, the date you opened those cards, the limit, the balance, payment history, any inquiries or requests for new credit, and then any negative information, public record and collections. So you can see that each of the components of the credit score can come from the information that is present on your credit report. How can you see this report? There's a website, annualcreditreport.com. And through that website, you can get one free report from each of the credit bureaus per year. Okay, so 3 credit reports, one from each bureau each year. And if you're a Georgia resident, then you can get an additional free report from each bureau each year by going directly to the website of that bureau. So the Equifax, Experian, TransUnion websites. When you get your credit report, it'll look something like this. So it'll have a personal information section. Basically here you just want to peruse it and see if there's any errors, make sure you've lived at all the places it mentions and nothing seems strange. Then you're going to have a section on negative information, any bankruptcies that maybe you filed, or outstanding tax debts, or any credit cards that have gone to collections. It's all going to be there. And then you're going to have a section for your current open accounts. And it's going to have all the information, where the account is from, what the limit is, how much you've spent, and then it's going to have a record of whether or not you've made on-time payments each of the months that that account has been opened. Okay, so the different bureaus each have kind of a different way of notating it. Some of them might just have a check mark. This one says okay, so you can look and see if you've had that perfect track record in your payment history. If you haven't had a perfect track record, your payment history section might look something like this. So you had on-time payments for all these months, and then you hit August and you're 30 days late, September 60 days late, 90 days late, 120, all the way until the account was sent to collections. So you will be able to see that on your report. Then you'll see a section, inquiries shared with others, inquiries shared only with you. What this means is basically which of the credit checks that have happened against your credit are actually hurting your score under the new credit category. Okay, so if you apply for a credit card, that's considered a hard inquiry or an inquiry shared with others, because you are giving permission to that credit card company to check your credit. Inquiries shared with others, or hard inquiries, are the only ones that negatively impact your credit score for a little while. Inquiries only shared with you, that's just so that you can see any credit card companies that have done a soft request on your credit to see if you pre-qualify for their credit cards. So if you've ever received in the mail an ad from an airline or a credit card company saying you're pre-approved for our credit card, that's because they've done a soft inquiry on your credit history and they've seen, you're a good borrower, and so they're sending you an offer. So that's just a soft inquiry. It's not a full pulling of your credit score and report, and that does not negatively impact your score at all. If you are looking up your credit score and it's lower than you think it should be and you can't figure out why, that's a good reason to look up your credit report. You want to know, what is it that's causing this score to go down? If you go look at your credit report, you'll be able to identify pretty easily what's causing negative information to go into your credit score. Maybe you missed a payment on a certain card, or you have an account open that you forgot you had open and you've been missing payments there that you forgot about, you didn't know. You'll be able to see all of that information on your credit report. So this can show a lot of information if you kind of want to know what's happening behind the curtain for your credit score. So real quick, I just want to go over what credit fraud versus identity theft is. Credit fraud is when funds are taken from your credit account without your permission. And credit fraud is not a huge deal, okay? You just report it to your credit card company. They're going to ask you a series of questions. They're going to reimburse you the money, and then they're going to send you a replacement card. Identity theft is when your information, your personal information, like your social security number, is used to open an entirely new account without your permission. And this is more problematic because however that person uses that account has a dramatic impact on your credit history and your score. So that's a good reason to check your credit report every so often, just to make sure there's nothing on there that looks uncertain or unfamiliar to you, because if there's something on there that you don't recognize, it could be a case of identity theft. So if that were to happen, you'd want to call the credit bureau, fraud department. You'd want to freeze your credit report. So basically that basically prevents anybody from checking your credit score or getting access to your credit history. And then you're going to file a police report. Okay, so identity theft is more serious, but it's often confused with credit card fraud, which is not as serious and only needs to be handled directly with the credit card company. So what if you have some negative information on your credit report? First of all, you can fix any errors by sending a written dispute to each credit bureau, and they are legally required to investigate the dispute. But if you have negative information that isn't necessarily an error, but you want to try and remove it, always try to negotiate with those lenders. First of all, any negative information like a missed payment is going to disappear off your credit report after 7 years. Okay, so the more time that lapses since that occurrence, the less and less it's going to impact your score. So one option is to just let it expire. Just wait it out. After 7 years, that negative information will disappear. A couple other options: the pay for delete, goodwill deletion. Basically, the idea here is if you've paid off the debt or you know you can pay off the debt, calling up the lender and saying, hey, if I make full payment, will you agree to erase your record or remove any record of negative information on my account? Then you'd go to the credit bureau, you'd dispute the negative information, and when the credit bureau contacts the lender to confirm whether or not you've missed payments or have any negative information, the lender will say, no, we have a record of completely good borrowing behavior, and then that will help resolve it on your credit report. All right, so what do you do if you're trying to rebuild up that credit score? First thing, explain damaging items to lenders. Lenders might consider your circumstances and they might do one of those goodwill deletions or pay for delete options for you. So it's always worth explaining why something has happened. Like if you've lost a job and that's why you haven't been able to make payments, it's worth explaining that to your lenders to see if they'll show you some grace. Secondly, you just want to focus on stabilizing. Okay, so don't worry about paying off all of your debts, or if you have one problematic debt, putting all of your money towards that one debt and neglecting your other debts. Like, no, just make at least minimum payments on all of your debts so that you can at least get that regular payment history. Remember, payment history is 35% of your score. So when you're trying to rebuild your credit, stabilize. Make at least minimum payments on everything and make those payments on time. Then start looking at that utilization rate. Okay, when you've got debts that are revolving debts, you want to get that amounts owed or the utilization low. You want it definitely below 30%, if possible below 10 to 15% of your available credit. And remember that utilization rate makes up 30% of your credit score. If you've got a credit card that's really racked up, maybe stop using that card, but keep it open and start paying it down. Okay? And if you have multiple credit cards with balances on them, send all your extra payments beyond the minimum payment to whatever card has the highest interest rate. All right, so what if you don't have any credit history? How can you start building credit? One option is to become an authorized user on somebody else's account who has a good credit history. So find a relative with a good score. It could be a parent, a sibling, a cousin, aunt or uncle, or even a child maybe who has a good credit score, and you can be added as an authorized user on that card. So if you're going to do this, you want to be added to their best card. Okay, so it should be their oldest account. It should be the card that they keep the lowest utilization on, because only that one card is going to be counted towards your credit score. Okay, so you want the card that they spend the least amount on, and a card that they've always paid on time, so a card that has a good payment history. Once you get added as an authorized user on that card, you'll get basically a copy of the card in your name, but they are responsible for all the charges on it. So if you racked up a bunch of charges on it and then you couldn't pay it off, like they would be the ones responsible for it. So if they're nervous about adding you on as an authorized user, then you don't have to use the account at all. Like you can cut up the card that's given to you and you will still reap the benefits of how they use the card. And this option is good for if you just need to kind of temporarily boost your score in anticipation of applying for your own credit card or applying for a loan of some sort. So this authorized user is really something that may only have a big impact on your score for like a 3 to 4 month period. So it's not really a long-term thing that you want to do, but it's something you can use to kind of give you that initial boost you might need in order to get your own credit started. All right, another option is to get a student card. So find a credit card company that's willing to approve credit for people with limited or no credit history. But just know that a lot of them will require at least a social security number. So that can be a little bit problematic for some of our international students who maybe don't have a social security number. So here's just a few options. if you do have a limited credit history, and these aren't the only options out there, but just a few. So Discover has a few cards. One's a secured card. Basically, you make a minimum deposit of $200, and that $200 becomes your credit limit. So you have access each month up to that $200, and you have to repay it each month. There's another Discover card, which is the Student Chrome card. And if you have some credit history, even if it's limited, then you would usually be able to get approved for this card, but a social security number is required. And then finally, there's a company called Deserve that has a series of MasterCards, and this is a good option for international students, okay? Because it doesn't require a social security number, and you don't have to have any credit history. So if you're an international student, you just moved here and you're trying to get into the credit system and start building up that credit history, then I would go ahead and check out Deserve and see if you can get started there. What if you do have a credit history and you're looking to open a credit card? Well, first of all, you want to do your research. So there's lots of options out there, different companies and banks that have their own cards. So do your research and look around to see who has the best deals. Also, you want to think long term. So get a card that you can see yourself using and being useful to you in the long run, because really you want to avoid closing credit cards. Because if you've had a card for a long time and you close it, you'll lose length of history on that card, which will hurt your credit score. And then number two, if you have a credit card that you close and it had, a decent sized credit limit, then basically you're increasing your utilization ratio because you're making your denominator, your total access to credit, smaller by closing a card, right? You're reducing your access to credit, which makes whatever you spend on the credit card a bigger proportion of your available credit, increasing your credit utilization ratio, decreasing your score. All right, so think long term when you're thinking about opening credit cards. Fees, a lot of cards have annual fees. You want to avoid these because there are lots of cards out there that don't have fees. So why pay a fee when you could get a card without a fee? They're really not worth it unless the benefits of having that card, like the bonuses, the rewards, exceed the value of the fees by so much that it exceeds even the benefit you could get from other bonuses on other cards that don't have fees. Think about interest rates. If you always pay the balance off, the interest rate doesn't really matter, but you never know when you might need it. So just be aware of interest rates and know that if you're getting a bonus like introduction rate of 0% or something, that it's not always going to be 0%, and it's going to jump up after that. So just be aware of that. And then finally, when it comes to points and miles and bonuses that you might get for different credit cards, just think about something that will be helpful to you in your spending and won't encourage additional spending. Okay, so like for me, I prefer to choose credit cards that give me points for things like groceries and gas and things that I purchase on a regular basis that I'm not really incentivized to like pay extra in order to get more points. But if you have a credit card that's going to give you points for traveling or shopping at certain retailers during certain months, then that's going to incentivize spending in a way that's outside of your normal spending, and you could end up actually spending more money than you're getting back in bonuses. So personally, I would caution against those types of cards. Let's talk a couple minutes about balance transfers. So there's an option if you have a credit card with a high interest rate, you have a balance and you're trying to pay it off and you're accumulating interest and you're working really hard to pay down that credit card, there is something out there called a balance transfer. And with balance transfers, you can basically take the balance from one card that's growing at a high interest rate, transfer it to another credit card that has a 0% introductory rate, and that way, while you're paying it off month to month, it's not growing at all. Okay, so this can be a great tool, but there's also some big cautions that I want to warn you against, so you can be prepared and have all the information you need to know whether or not this is a good idea. So first of all, pay attention to the transfer fee. There's usually going to be a transfer fee of 3 to 5% that's going to be due up front. So if you're transferring, $1,000 to a 0% card, right off the bat, you're going to have to pay 30 to 50 bucks, right? If you're transferring a balance of $10,000 to a 0% card, right off the bat, you're going to have to be able to pay $300 to $500 of that $10,000. All right, so just be aware that there's going to be a financial obligation on the front end to pay that transfer fee. Second, avoid new charges on the card. All these cards have different terms, but some of them have terms such that if you make a new purchase on the card, you lose the introductory rate. Okay, so I would just say, to be safe, don't make new charges on that card. Also know that you're still going to have to be making monthly payments on the card. You're going to have a minimum monthly payment that you're required to make in order to stay in good standing with payment history. Know that you're still going to have that obligation. And also pay attention to the terms, because if you miss one of those monthly minimum payments, it could automatically end the 0% interest rate. So you would lose the benefit of it right then and there. Now, this is the biggest point I want to make, which is do not let the 0% period expire while you still have a balance. So let's say you transfer that $10,000 to the card and you get 0% interest for 12 months. Don't let those 12 months run out while you still have that $10,000 or any amount of it left on the card. Why? Because you will be back charged interest on whatever balance you have at the new rate, which is usually like in the 20% range for all the prior 12 months. All right, so you transfer your balance to a 0% card, say it was a $10,000 balance, you have 12 months, 0%. Let's say by the end of those 12 months, you managed to pay off half of it. So let's say you have $5,000 still remaining on the card. As soon as that new rate comes in, let's say it's 20%, you're going to get charged 20% on the $5,000 you have left back for 12 months worth, right? So an annual rate of 20%, so divided by 12 for 12 months, right? And that will not be pretty. That would be a pretty big bill. So just know, if you're going to do this option, pay off the full balance by the time you get to the end of the introductory rate. Another kind of hot topic when it comes to managing debt and credit cards and all that kind of stuff is this idea of refinancing. So what is refinancing? Refinancing is basically when you take out a new loan in order to pay off an old loan, where the new loan has a lower interest rate. So let's say you have a mortgage of $100,000 at 5% interest, and you find this other lender that is offering mortgages of $100,000 for only 3%. So what you could do is you could take out the loan with the new lender for 3% and use that $100 to pay off your old loan. And then now you just have monthly payments back to the new lender at 3% interest rather than the original 5% that you had on the old loan, right? So this can be a good idea, but again, there are some drawbacks and just some things that you need to be thinking about to know whether or not it's actually worth it to be doing a refinance. So some things to consider. First of all, you want to look at what closing costs are involved and how are they charged. A lot of times, especially for mortgage refinances, there's a big fee at the beginning to do the refinance, because in order to refinance, they'll have to do a home appraisal. There's, people that have to be involved in writing up the new mortgage contract and all this kind of stuff, and that costs money. A simple refinance could cost $3,000 or $4,000 up front just to do the refinance. So any savings you're getting by going to the lower interest rate may be completely lost just by the fee and closing costs that are involved in getting out that new refinance loan. So then it wouldn't be worth it at all. So that's something to consider. Second, you want to make sure to consider whether your unsecured debts are going to become secured debts as a result of refinancing. So one of the options I've seen a lot of people do is, if they have really high credit card debt, and the interest rate is 15 or 20%, then they'll take out a loan against the value of their car at like 2% and use that to pay off their credit card debt, and then they'll make payments against the car debt at a lower interest rate. So again, could be really smart, reducing your interest so you can pay off the debt faster. But what happens when you take credit card debt and you pay it off in exchange for a debt against your car. Well, you've taken an unsecured debt and you've created a secured debt. So now if you're not able to make payments on that debt, you could lose your car. Whereas before, if you couldn't make payments on that debt, it was a credit card. It was unsecured. The worst thing that could happen to you is a change credit score, getting called by collections, but they couldn't take any of your property. But now you've tied that debt up with something valuable that could be taken from you. So you always want to consider, why am I wanting to refinance? And is there actually just a lifestyle change that needs to occur? Okay, so if you have credit card debt and you are not able to make payments on that debt, refinancing it isn't going to help you really. Yeah, that debt's going to grow at a smaller rate if you can find an interest rate, but if you couldn't come up with the money for payments on your credit card, you're not going to be able to come up with the money for payments on the car loan. Always be thinking about, what is the purpose of my refinancing? Is it that I'm not able to make payments currently on my debts? And if so, then there might need to be some other lifestyle change in order to increase the amount of cash you have available to put towards that debt. And you just want to think, what happens when the safety net runs out, right? So now you might have the ability to take out a loan against your car to pay off your credit card debt. But what happens if once you have the car loan, you rack up more credit card debt? Now all of a sudden you have credit card debt and a car loan and no more value against your car that you can use to, refinance the new credit card debt, right? So there's only so far that your safety net can go when it comes to refinancing. So you just got to be careful that refinancing isn't being used as an avoidance tactic and instead is being used strategically to decrease the amount of money that you have to pay because of lower interest rates when you do have the money to pay off the debt. All right, so I'm just going to walk through a couple myths real quick about what we've covered today. There's a lot of myths out there when it comes to credit cards. So as we go through these, just be thinking in your head whether you think they're true and false. And this will be the last part of the presentation. So myth number 1, is this true or false? Leaving a balance on your credit card increases your score. I've heard this one a lot. So a lot of people say, if you leave a balance, you carry over a balance on your card, it's going to increase your credit score. All right, that's false, right? We know that's false because of the utilization ratio, right? So actually, if you paid off the balance before the statement came out, your utilization ratio would be lower. And just by leaving a balance on your card, your utilization ratio is going to be higher. And honestly, carrying over a balance doesn't impact your score at all. All it impacts is that you're going to pay interest on that balance. Number 2, having several credit cards lowers your credit score. That is also false. So actually having more credit cards could increase your credit score because it means you have access to more credit, which means the denominator in the utilization ratio fraction is going to be bigger, which means your ultimate ratio is going to be smaller, which is going to help your score. So the star on this, or the caveat to this, is if you open a bunch of credit cards all at the same time, then that could hurt your score because you're going to have multiple credit checks, which will ding your score. All right, closing extra credit cards lowers your credit score. That is true, right? Because if you close a credit card, you're removing that credit card from your utilization ratio, right? Which is going to decrease your score. And if it's your oldest credit card, then it could also hurt you in the length of history section because you want to have the longest history of credit possible. Not using your credit card can increase your credit score. That is true, right? Because if you don't use your card, you haven't charged anything on it, your utilization ratio will be smaller, which will increase your score. Where this could possibly not be true is if you got your very first credit card and then you never used it. If you never used it, then no data is going to be reported to the credit bureaus. So you might, if you looked at your credit report, it might just say no data. So you do want to use your cards a little bit, but once you have that history of using it, you don't need to continue using every single card. And if you get a notice from the bank saying, hey, we've noticed you haven't used your card in a long time and we're going to close it, all you have to do is, make a couple little purchases the next month and they'll keep the card open. Having high student loan debt decreases your credit score. False, right? For types of credit. The more types of credit you have, the better your credit score will be. And the amount of debt you have, installment debt you have, does not impact your utilization ratio at all. It's only revolving credit. Applying to several credit cards at one time decreases your score. That's true. Applying for several car loans at one time decreases your score. That's true, but it only decreases your score as if you applied once. Okay, so let's say you applied for 5 different car loans in a span of 2 weeks. It'll only hurt your score as if you applied once, okay? Because they want to encourage you to actually shop around for the best interest rates, okay? So you can apply for several car loans at one time to look for the best interest rate. All right, so that concludes the credit presentation. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email me at gradfineduc@uga.edu. That's gradfineduc@uga.edu, and I will be happy to give you answers. And if you have any questions even about other presentations we have, then feel free to send those. And we hope that this session allowed you to learn something new about credit and hopefully kind of reduce some of the stress you may have about the uncertainty around credit and how it can impact your financial future. So thank you for joining us.